This is Devlog -1, and it's -1 because I stopped working on the game quite a while ago, really. I was working on this in the summer of 2022, and I gave up around October of the same year. So I guess that makes this more of a post-mortem than a devlog. It's a common story, I'm sure. I underestimated the amount of work involved. I lost faith in what I was working on. I wasn't happy with the results that I had come up with. It's funny, I really should have recorded this back in 2022 when I was actually working on the game. I was taking screen caps and learning video editing software, but I was put off by the low view counts I saw in some of the devlogs on YouTube. I had a sense that people were putting lots of work into these devlogs, and they were only getting very small numbers of views. But I think recently the YouTube algorithm changed, and some small channels are getting some love now, so I think it's time to give this a shot. So let's go back to 2019. I just bought an Oculus Quest, and I was completely blown away by how good it was. I had the benefit of going in with low expectations because people were trashing it online. But yeah, I mean, up to that point, nothing really exceeded my expectations in tech so much as VR. I guess a year or two later, AI art and ChatGPT would also exceed my expectations. But up to that point, VR was the first thing that really blew me away. I already knew how to code, and I had been playing with HTML5 games and 3JS a bit, but I never committed to learning Unreal Engine or Unity or any of the fully fledged game engines. So I started down the familiar path for newbie game devs, and along with that is the sort of stages of grief of slowly realizing that the idealized game that you first imagined creating would be completely impossible to create as a solo dev. And so that took a bit of the air out of my tires, but I kept coming back to game dev because it's just fun. It's fun to make games. And so I pretty much gave up on the idea of creating a commercially successful game, and instead started thinking of the advice to scratch your own itch. The idea is to make something that you yourself would enjoy, and maybe later if things fall into place, you can flesh it out and try getting other people to play it, or even to pay for it. And this one idea kept popping into my head. When I first got the Oculus Quest, I was using it to exercise every night. I would play this game, Thrill of the Fight, a boxing game, and while I played it, I would listen to language learning recordings because I was trying to learn Mandarin at the time. And I'd often get frustrated and wish I could play back the last 10 seconds or so of the recording. And following that thread, I started imagining that I could use the Anki controls from within the boxing game. If you're not familiar with Anki, it's a simple flashcard app. When you look at the answer to the question on the card, you choose between a few values on how hard of a time you had with that card, and then that value is used to schedule when that card will be shown to you again. And I looked into it, and there were a dozen extensions that gamified Anki and turned it into some kind of Pokemon or RPG type of game. So it seemed like an idea that already existed out there, and it was something that seemed fairly simple that I could get working from within VR. And flashcard games are kind of like a simple Hello World type of program. Like, it's not the most complex or interesting, but it's just something that you can get working and then build on. So I thought it was a good place to start. So I decided I was going to make an MVP, a minimal viable product, just to see if I could get something simple going with the flashcard game and pull it into the VR world. And for the game itself, I had lots of ideas, but I just wanted to get the most simple thing working at first to see if I could get the ball rolling. And I settled on this idea where at first it started with there would be many animals in the world, and each animal would represent a card, and you would have to kind of gather them up and collect them. But just to get anything working, I decided I was just going to have these animals in the world and you were going to shoot at them. Really simple, you know. Also in the world there would be a floating HUD that would act as the UI for the Anki side of things. But instead of interacting directly with the HUD, which seemed a bit clunky, if you were prompted to input the difficulty for a specific card, the way you would interact with the Anki side of things is you would flip between different projectiles using the VR thumb controller, and then when you interacted with one of the animals in the world, whatever projectile was chosen would count as the input. So that was the plan, and I went about looking for some assets because I'm not an art guy, I wasn't going to make it myself, and I was looking for anything that could help me out. I found a VR spellcasting asset so that instead of shooting projectiles at the animals, it would be like casting spells, which were actually just fireballs and various particle effects. I also got a pack of low poly animals, which came with a bunch of animations. I picked up a third-person cat template. I thought that I could repurpose it for the enemies in the VR game. For the HUD, I figured out how to render a browser within a UI widget within the Unreal game, and I found an old $7 asset, which was completely broken out of the box, but I was able to get it working, and it helped be able to move the UI widget around in the world and resize it, and seemed like a pretty important part of the game. but there was still a lot of work to do. I think one of the first signs that I underestimated how difficult this was going to be was when I started working with the animals. I was able to do animation retargeting on the cat assets to just replace the cat with any of the animals that I bought. But because the bone hierarchies didn't match up perfectly, the animations got kind of messed up. And that wasn't that big a deal because I was going to swap out those animations anyway. I was just kind of trying to swap out little pieces one at a time without breaking anything. But I did have some trouble with the inverse kinematics on the bones of the legs of the animals. One of the annoying things back in 2022 was UE5 just came out, so everything I was buying in the marketplace was clearly written within UE4, and they also had just come out with a bunch of new things like control rigs, and I think they changed the system for inverse kinematics, so when I dug into how the cat was had its own IK set up, it was using these blueprint nodes that just weren't documented at all, and like virtual bones. It was completely confusing to me. And so I basically punted on it. I don't think I ever even ended up fixing this. Although it's been so long, I don't exactly remember. Clearly it was going in some kind of infinite loop. I think because the ray trace was coming from a bone that was being moved within the IK, so it would move it and then it would pop back, and it doesn't matter. This happened so long ago. The first thing that really messed me up though was the turning of the animals. I set up a somewhat complex behavior tree using the Unreal EQS, which stands for Environment Query System, where the animal, upon seeing you, would run and hide. It would wait some period of time, and then it would choose random points at a random distance from you where there was a visible line of sight between you and the animal. And the idea was the animal could like stop and growl, or would give you a chance to hit it, or the animal could also launch some type of projectile at you or something like that, although I never got around to implementing that. And each time it chose a different location around you, there was also a probability that it could charge you and attack instead of just kind of running around. But the problem is the animals would run in a straight line to its destination and only then turn to face the player, which was a problem because the animals' turn-in-place animations didn't look so great. I actually ended up reusing the retargeted animation from the cat asset, and I put a bunch of work into making it look better by speeding it up and just kind of messing with it, but in the end, I still wasn't so happy with it. I think I could have fixed it if I kept working on it by just imperatively adding more nodes and more behavior to kind of direct the animals into a path where it would kind of arc around and then just end up facing the player, but I needed to move on to other things. For the spellcasting projectile system, I just had to extract the asset and fix some things up for the UE5 migration. I noticed that a lot of the marketplace assets just throw everything into the default pawn, and I got pretty good at extracting the functionality out into actor components and changing from explicit cast to interfaces and other things like that. And in the end, I was able to launch fireballs from my hand and make it rain and various other things. It seemed pretty cool. And for the final piece of the puzzle, the Anki part of the game, this actually went really well at first. The plan was to put the cards into HTML and render them into the world via a browser UI widget, and I'd then display that widget from within the VR HUD, and I was able to set up a web server with a JSON endpoint to get the cards, and I had them successfully displaying in the browser widget, and I set up the VR HUD, which was a pretty significant challenge because the asset was so old and it was completely broken out of the box. It was super complicated. There was all sorts of like trig functions because it had to handle rotation around the player as well as stretching and moving around and things, but after like a week with it, I had a pretty good sense of how it worked and everything seemed to be going well. But then I got some pretty bad news. With VR, when you play the game in VR preview mode from the editor, you're actually just using your PC to run the code, and you're basically just viewing it from the headset. And I was aware about this, and I was super paranoid about performance on the Quest hardware, so I was at least once a week building the project and actually testing it out. And when I finally got around to this for the browser UI widget part of the game, I built it, and it was just a small test level. It wasn't even the full game, and it just wasn't working. And then I tried rendering just an HTML string hard-coded directly into the game, and it still didn't work, so it wasn't a network issue either. I started looking into it, and there were bug reports and forum posts with similar complaints, and a lot of people saying the browser widget didn't work within the Quest. And this messed me up pretty bad because I swear I remember reading a forum thread before I even started this project just to confirm that the browser worked within the Quest. I kind of built the whole project around that idea that I could kind of leverage my JavaScript skills from within this VR thing. I kind of heavily was kind of, maybe not so much for the demo, but in the bigger picture, I was kind of already thinking in terms of how I could use this. And so not being able to do that, it was pretty much like the death blow to the project. It was just over at that point. I did go through a bit of a coping phase when I was thinking that I could just render the browser cards, the HTML, directly to images and then ship that to the Quest to render it as like a texture or something like that. That's not actually such a hard thing to do. That's how social media images work a lot. When you if you post a link within Discord or whatever, it'll fetch a picture of what the browser would look like. But it still it took all the wind out of my sails. I really didn't want to work on this anymore. And so at that point, it was basically just over. Also, to be fully honest, I think that I was losing faith in this Anki card idea, almost like from the day I started working on it. Like, it does seem like it's like mixing like a recreational activity playing games with like studying, which I think a lot of people would choose just to study really hard and then spend their time doing other things, not really combine it. And so it sort of put the game into like this like educational type bracket, which wasn't really even originally my idea. Like, I kind of, in my mind when I was thinking about the game, when I was first starting, I really wanted it to be like an exercise game, and it sort of morphed into this like silly little thing because I was just trying to get anything moving. And yeah, I ended up working on something that I really just didn't care about at all. And so I guess it was time to end. So yeah, that happened. But on to the next game, I guess. I've been keeping my eye on 2D games in Unreal. I did Copper Code's course last summer, and I thought it was really cool. I think that would probably be a good project, some type of 2D game, probably geared towards mobile phones. And I haven't put too much thought into exactly what I want to make, but I've been mostly concentrating on the technical challenges, like how to get user input on mobile devices for controlling the 2D characters and things like that. And so that's probably what I'll be covering in the next devlog. So if that's something that interests you, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.